Hey YouTube. This video that I'm going to do today is one that I've tried to record quite a few times. This is one of my favorite pistols that I don't actually carry that often. This is the Walther P99 AS. So, there's a couple of really good videos out there on the P99 AS that explain the trigger system, which is interesting. I'm not going to go too much into detail on the trigger system. There's better videos out there for that. But I do want to do an overview of this gun, and I'll touch on the trigger in a little bit. This is not a common gun. This isn't a gun you're going to see often. And the most common place that you'll find this gun is in James Bond lore. He used this gun kind of the second half of Tomorrow Never Dies, or rather the beginning of the third act of Tomorrow Never Dies, all the way through Casino Royale, and then he changed back to his PPK during Quantum of Solace. So, this gun is a 9mm pistol. You can also get it in 40 Smith & Wesson. And the 9mm version, in my opinion, is the way to go. This is not a stock P99. There are some changes that I've made to this gun, but I just want to talk briefly about this and why I like it so much. Now, the P99 came out in the late 90s. This is the second iteration of the gun. There was kind of an intermediate iteration that I'm not going to count. But the first iteration, I'll post a picture here, had a proprietary rail on the front. It also had a slightly different trigger guard and different slide serrations, and as far as I remember, it had different magazines. Now, these magazines that are in the P99 currently have 15 rounds, and I purchased this prior to the magazine ban in my state, so I have them at 15 rounds, which is awesome. For a while, this was one of my home defense pistols, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But now it's kind of in a carry gun position, but I almost never carry it. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll get into those. First, I'll talk about the magazines. The 15-round magazines are made in Italy. I'm pretty sure they're made by Mekar, although they aren't stamped. These are fantastic magazines. The heart of any gun, any semi-automatic firearm, is its magazines, and you can find this to be true all over the place. These magazines are relatively inexpensive. This particular one is a Magnum Research Baby Desert Eagle magazine, which is a clone of the P99. You can also get Walther marked P99 magazines. They're in the $30-something range, which is more than a Glock mag, but they drop free, quick, smooth from the gun. They never bind up. They're very nice, and the only reason it's not dropping free is because I'm not vertical. If I go like that, it just drops, whether it's empty or full. It's really nice. The grip, going kind of up from the bottom, the grip is... P99 was one of the first guns that I can remember, maybe the first, that had interchangeable back straps. Remember, this came out in the late 90s when accessory rails were not even a big thing. The USP from H&K had just come out. So interchangeable backstraps was a big deal. And right now this is wearing the small backstrap. The medium fits me fine, but I like the small plus a rubber, I think this is Talon Grip's brand backstrap. So if you get a grip tape for this gun, you have to choose the backstrap you're getting the grip tape with. So I think the small plus the rubber grip works really well for me. I can get a full purchase on that trigger, even though the trigger's at its fully forward position. We'll talk about the trigger in two spaces from here. But I can get a full grip on that double action trigger, and also, one of the reasons I have the small grip on here is when I was using this for home defense, and when it was kind of in that position, I wanted a gun that my wife, who has smaller hands than I, would be comfortable holding if she needed to. So that's where this comes in. Next piece that we're going to talk about is the magazine release. Now, some Walther PPQs, PPQ is the striker-fired version of this gun, essentially, have a button magazine release, the M2 I think they call it. However, the M1, the first iteration of the PPQ, has a paddle magazine release, and this gun, which came out before the PPQ, has a paddle magazine release. Now, I love the paddle magazine release. I'm going to show you. So I have magazine, empty chamber. I'm not going to pull the trigger until I verify everything's empty. But this is a leather holster. I have a polymer holster, and I find that I just use this leather one more often. Again, I barely carry this gun. But if you have a leather holster, either you will have the magazine release exposed, or it'll be kind of floppy and pushy over here. If you don't have a rigid piece that's covering that magazine release, if the gun gets pushed up against your body, and this has happened to me a couple times if I'm like working on a car or I'm crawling or something, you push that magazine release, it can release the magazine just by the pressure of your body on the gun, and it can pop out. I'll just do this for effect. It can pop out to there and just be kind of sitting, and then you'll still have a round in the chamber, but when you go to fire your gun, the magazine will just drop free, or you'll have to do a tap rack. That's where the tap rack comes in. So what I find is this magazine release is really nice because you can't actuate it just by pressing on it. So that's kind of cool. You can use the magazine release two ways. One is you can cant the gun to the side and use your thumb, which I don't like. You have to cant it a ton in order to use your thumb, or rather I do. But the way that I prefer is to hold my thumb and my index finger to the side of the gun, and then I use my middle finger on my shooting hand to drop the mag. I've never had an issue with this. I do this with my H&Ks and this Walther, and I prefer the paddle magazine release. Okay, now is the fun part. Now we make sure the gun's empty. I get the rounds out of here. Okay, the P99 Trigger. This is by far the most complicated part of the gun. The P99 is a striker-fired pistol, and it's also a double-action, single-action pistol with a third mode called the anti-stress mode, the AS mode. Double-action mode, simple like everything else. You have a fully forward trigger, and you have a relatively heavier. It actually reminds me very much of a SIG double action. You have a heavy double action pull. You get to the back. There's not a defined wall, and the trigger breaks all the way at the end of the trigger guard. It stacks. It gets heavier right about here, but there's no wall on it. It just kind of rolls through. I can actually shoot the double action in this gun pretty well, surprisingly well. And despite its weight. Now, regarding its weight, I have a trigger pull gauge, and I'm just going to show that it maxes out greater than 8 pounds. It's probably closer to 10 pounds, because I'm at 8 pounds right here. I keep pulling, so it's maybe 9 or 10 pounds. It's not insanely heavy. It's not like a Polish radon or anything. But it's a lot of travel. Like, you have tension on the trigger. Let's show in my auxiliary camera here. You have tension on the trigger from here all the way to there. Now, after the gun fires, this is the best part of the gun. Watch this. I don't know if you can see it. Wait for that reset. I'm letting this off super slow. Oh, there it is. So that's your reset. The reset on this gun is epic, and the only pistol I've ever fired other than certain 1911s, not even all 1911s, but certain high-quality 1911s that have this good of a reset on a semi-automatic pistol is the Walther PPQ. So the P99 has one of the best polymer triggers, resets in a polymer trigger out there. It is fantastic. So taking taking 1911s off the table, this and the PPQ are like through the roof as far as good polymer triggers from the factory. Even custom Glock triggers, I've never had this good of a reset on a custom Glock trigger. It is crisp, it is really short, and if you've got a quick trigger finger, you can shoot this gun epically fast. Okay, that aside, so the gun resets, and then your trigger is now in its rearward position, and I have an auxiliary camera here. You have a striker indicator. Now this striker tells you that you're in single action mode. The striker is cocked. Now, from here, I don't have to do much of anything. I can take my trigger finger, put it on the gun, and it's relatively light up until about here, and that's where you feel a wall. It's not super light. You still feel a bit of tension in the trigger, but you get to right here, and then you have a wall, and all you're doing at this wall is dropping that striker. In the single action mode, let me reset it to single. In the single action mode, you have very little, rather a short take up. You still have take up, and then you get to a defined wall, which is different from your double action trigger. So you really do have to learn two different triggers on here. And let's see what this single action breaks at. Here we go. So we're at about 4 pounds just getting to that wall, and then it breaks at 4.5. This is an honest 4.5 pound pull, and if you've seen some of my other videos, I've measured a Glock trigger, and the Glock trigger, all of my Glocks stock break at like 7.5 pounds or so. They break high, and they don't have like the New York trigger kit or anything in there. It's stock components. But the claim of 5.5 pounds is only, in my experience, for very well-worn Glocks, and that's the poundage of the connector and not the actual trigger. So people lie when they're like, oh, this feels like a Glock, it must be 5.5 pounds. This is lighter than a Glock. Okay, so you're going through your gun, your first shot is double action, cycles, you're in single action from here, cycles, then all of a sudden, the slide locks to the rear, and you're ready to reload. Now, I have a slide lock lever on the left side only, so to actuate with my thumb. It's big enough that you can use your index finger. If you're left-handed, you can drop it like so. Not a big deal. And the gun reloads. But your trigger is now in the forward position, but your striker is fully primed. This is the anti-stress mode. Now, let's pretend you're in a gunfight. Let's pretend you're shooting your gun and you go to reload. Unless you're an absolute idiot, you're not going to stand there and reload in place. You're going to be moving. You're going to have to kind of get off the line while you reload, because that takes some time. So you're going to be looking for cover. You're going to be on the move. What should happen is you should take your finger off the trigger and start moving. Now, I don't know about the tactics or what you should be doing as an operator if you have a gun with a safety or something, but I've heard people say that this is an appropriate time to engage your safety, because if you're moving and you slip, trip, and fall, and you still have a round in the chamber and you have to, or even you're empty and you reload your gun, you may have to move before you decide to shoot again. Now, the Walther has a decocking lever up here that we'll get to, but you're still in cocked striker mode. But what they do is they put the trigger to the fully forward position, so you have to make that extra effort. Not a lot of effort. It's a very light trigger, similar to the H&K LEM trigger, to move this trigger bar all the way to the rear of the travel, and then you have a single action break. So it's essentially a cocked single action gun at this point, but the trigger is fully forward, and you can't shoot the gun without pulling the trigger all the way to the rear. Now, when I pull the trigger halfway, it'll click, and that puts it back essentially, let's go for it, right there. That puts it back to single action mode. This is exactly like if I was shooting the gun and I let go of the trigger mid-string of fire. If you're in decocked mode, so you can see what I did there. If the gun is cocked, take your thumb on your right hand, go up. That's your decocker right up here. If you're decocked, so your striker is in the fully forward position, you can bring the gun to AS mode, or to single action mode, to AS mode rather, just by pulling the striker, the slide back yay far, 1/4 inch, and then returning. Now you're cocked and you have a single action trigger type pull, very light trigger. So if you need to make a precise shot at distance, you know, bad guys 35 yards away or something, and you need to make a shot and you're not as confident with your double action mode, you just do that and you're in single action now. It doesn't remove around from the chamber, your chamber stays in whatever condition it was. Enough about the trigger. It's a great trigger, but a complicated one. It's kind of a theme for me. I tend to prefer complicated triggers in carry guns. Now, regarding carry guns, this is a pretty good carry gun. It's not as good, in my opinion, as a double action with a hammer, because you can't thumb the hammer to keep it from shooting. You can shoot like that as well. But you do have that nice double action pull, so if you're carrying this in appendix, like I like to do, you don't have to worry so much about it getting accidentally actuated. Again, why I also carry this in a leather holster. Usually I prefer Kydex or some kind of rigid plastic, but this leather holster works fine. Okay, moving up the gun. Disassembly is just like a Glock in that you have two tabs that you pull down here. The gun has to be decocked, so you can do that either with the decocking lever or by pulling the trigger. I prefer the decocking lever. To take the gun apart, you have two tabs, pull like so. Just as simple as that. You can actually see right here, this is your striker assembly, just like on a Glock. However, what's different is you actually have two interfaces on here. You have this little dog leg to one side, and you have the flat to the other. And what this actually is this is your two triggers, your double action and your single action. Go figure. The only modifications I've made to this gun, other than the grip tape, are on the slide. I've upgraded my sights to Trigicon HD sights. The gun comes with 3 or 4, I think 4 different sight blades that are easy to change out, very similar to a Glock, in that they have an out-of-round hole, and then you have a screw that you put in, just like that. The stock sights are plastic, just like a Glock. The Trigicon HDs are metal and absolutely worth the upgrade. I love the Trigicon HD sights. The rear sight, out of the box, is adjustable for windage, which is really cool until you realize how easy it is to take the sight off. There is a little plunger to the right-hand side of the slide, right here, that you can push down with your thumb or a key or something, and you can pop the sight off. That's really cool if you're going to change it or if you're going to adjust it for windage. However, what I like to do is I like to put a little bit of sticky glue, like a shoe goo or something on there, that I can still remove if I need to, but it holds it in a little better, because I have shot this plunger just like any other plunger on any other gun. When this plunger comes out and that sight comes off, there's a little piece of metal and a spring, and I've lost both of those before when I was changing my sights. So be careful. Now, I have also changed to a metal guide rod, because the plastic one, I don't have any issue with plastic guide rods from a reliability. However, this gun actually flips quite a bit in my hand. We're going to do an unloaded weight on this gun. Unloaded weight in grams is 640. This is a pretty lightweight firearm. Plus 15 round magazine and one in the chamber is 930. Now, the reason that I don't carry this gun that often is coming up in a second. Oh, and actually, one quick note before I go on. Because you have the decocker on the top of this gun, you can't put an RMR on here. You could put an RMR and lose function of the decocker, which I guess would work, but you can't mill the top of the slide for an RMR just because of that decocker in its position. Really, if you want to do that, you got to go to the PPQ and get that taken care of. So this is an iron sight only firearm, just how it is. So the reason that I don't carry the Walther P99 that often is because my state only allows me to carry 10 round magazines. Now let me quickly point out and very firmly point out, if I didn't have a 15 round magazine limit, I would have this gun on me every day in public. This is a very comfortable gun to carry. It's a little larger than a Glock in the grip. Really, there's a full grip on here, but it's the size of a HK-P30, VP9, or something else. It's a very comfortable gun to carry. The 10 round magazines for the Walther are dimensionally very similar to the 15 round magazines. However, they have this big plastic piece on the bottom that just reminds you every time you put it in the gun that you're just wasting space. I don't mind that so much. From a functional level, it doesn't add anything to the magazine, it just takes up space. It reminds you can only fit 10 and not 15. However, let me unload this because it is loaded. Another gun that I carry often, and much more often than the P99, is my HK P2000 Sk. As far as size, it is smaller than the P99. A little bit, not a ton. Smaller in length, same size in width, although it's a little blockier up in the slide, and smaller in grip size. So, that's it. It also has an accessory rail that I've never mounted anything to. I'll talk about the accessory rail on the P99 in a second. And it also has a paddle magazine release, which is really cool. And it also has a LEM trigger, which has a very similar kind of long trigger travel, but a wall at the very end. And it's got a decent, not great, reset. Definitely not as good. Not even in the same ballpark as the P99, but a very serviceable polymer frame reset nonetheless. It is very similar to, come on, unloaded. You're at 612 versus unloaded on the P99. You're at 640. Essentially the same weight. Now, when you go with a 15 round mag plus one in the chamber, you're at 930 on the P99. You go with a 10 round mag plus one in the chamber, you are at 816. So it's a much bigger difference when you talk about magazine capacity. But just for kicks, let me see what. So I've never actually weighed this. 853. Okay, so a 10 round mag on this gun is a little heavier, but not by much. And the only thing you're getting is added grip, which is nice, but not always that nice. And I've got other guns that are more grippy. The P2000 Sk just more often fits what I want to do as far as carrying a gun concealed. If I could have 15 rounds in a gun, like I said, it would be the Walther every day. Almost every day. You got to change it up for fun, but Last piece, let's get this out of the way. Last piece, the accessory rail. This accessory rail is not a standard size. This is not the size of the Glock rail. The PPQ has more space. This has a very generous trigger guard that I can almost not touch. So it's a very nice trigger guard on here. But because of that, it sits so far forward, the accessory rail is shorter than a Glock. A couple of lights do fit on this gun. As far as I know, there's no Surefires that will fit on this gun, but Streamlights, the TLR1 series, does have a key that fits in the P99. It's labeled like TS99 or TW99, something like that. But it will fit in the gun just fine, and you can mount a TLR1 on here, which is a really good light. Compact lights like the TLR3 and I think the TLR7 series will also fit on here, which is nice. But as far as a light on this gun, I tend to just run this as it is. Really good gun, not very popular. You don't see a lot of them around. If you do see one, I highly recommend taking a look at it. The trigger is not for everyone. With this gun, if there's a round in the chamber, anytime you pull the trigger, it'll work. Also, I forgot to mention about the trigger, if you have a bad primer or something, you have a bad round, you can pull the trigger as many times as you want. You have that double strike capability on here, which, you know, a lot of times people say, oh, just tap and rack and you'll be good. Well, you know what, you might not have two hands, and, you know, in the fight, you might only have one. And I have, on a couple of occasions, two occasions with this gun, run into bad primers where having that second strike capability was definitely enough to set off the primer. So, there you go. Just so you know. Walther P99 AS, if you can find one, pick it up. I think they're still in production. But, yeah, they're great guns. The Gen 1 is more nostalgic, functionally the same as the Gen 2. Gen 2 just has different slide serrations, an accessory rail, and a larger paddle. That's it. Oh, and a slightly different form trigger guard. No big deal. Anyway, stay safe out there, guys. See you. Hope you've enjoyed this long review of the Walther P99. Unfortunately, I don't have any shooting footage of this. Hope you guys have good luck finding ammo. I have a stash that I'm not going to be shooting for a while because I don't know when stores are going to become available. Stores of ammo are going to become available. But right now, the price is through the roof. So if you're just getting into guns and you've got a hole burning in your pocket because you can't be buying ammo, maybe pick up one of these used if they've got them around. So good luck. It's a great gun, great pistol. Again, iron sight only. So if you're into optics, this is not the gun for you. But definitely peculiar and a little kind of counterculture compared to something like a Glock 19. See you guys up. Stay safe out there.